So my name is Jacob Bolin. I'm the program manager for Plugin NC. I'd like to really first and foremost thank a lot of the folks behind the scenes that have made the setup of this event possible. It's been a lot of work to pull everything together. So just want to say thanks to everybody for presenters, our communications and IT support, and of course all of our participants and attendees as well. So as I've mentioned, we've got a few different objectives for why we've kind of pulled everybody together today. We certainly had these annual member summits in the past. Of course, they've been more focused in person. We've had a few events now over the last couple of weeks where we've been able to see some friendly faces in person, which has been really nice. But we're excited about the opportunity to create a virtual space where everybody can come together. Maybe a little bit more conveniently. We've been able to work with all of our project partners across the state, and we know that you are representing so many different areas and regions in North Carolina and beyond. So thank you for showing up today on this platform. So, we're here today to celebrate first and foremost 10 years of Plugin NC. And really think about what the next 10 years have in store for us. And I think a big part of that is going to be really hearing from, our Plugin NC members and ambassadors and steering committee members, really just focusing on, the direction of this program, what kind of support is needed and where that support's needed. In order to do that, I think we really need to have a very good pulse of what's happening in the state. We feel excited about how open and collaborative our project partners are, which really allow us to feel connected to these projects that are happening and participating in these projects in many, many cases. As many of you are aware, we're also here to really celebrate and welcome any new Plugin NC members and site hosts. So just over the last year, there's been a huge progress in terms of the infrastructure deployment across the state. So just want to welcome, all of the new site hosts, mostly through, the VW settlement plan phase 1. So if there are, well, why don't we do this? If there are any new site hosts as part of the VW phase 1 awards, or if you were a VW awardee in any other way, why don't you use the emoji to just raise your hand or give a thumbs up really quick? Just want to get a quick pulse from everybody. So if you go to the top of your team's platform, you should have the option to provide a thumbs up or raise your hand. So I see a couple folks there. Yeah, let's give it another minute, see if we get a few more. Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Great. And then lastly, we just want to hear how you can support electric transportation and how we can help with that. So, again, please feel free to share your thoughts and your needs and your lessons learned. That's really what this session is really going to be about. So just very quickly, just want to share the who and the what of Plugin NC. Most of us are familiar at this point, but again, if we think about maybe a lot of those new site hosts and new program participants, we really want to welcome you with this platform of Plugin NC. We're here to promote electric transportation through education and outreach, collaboration, consulting, resource development, really making sure that supporters have the information they need and have the tools and platform that they need to share their story or to learn more or to work through any hardships. And we really want to create that collaborative platform for all of our different stakeholders to work together. And I think that this convening is a really wonderful example of that. We've got so much representation on the line today, from municipalities to community colleges and universities, to state agencies, to private businesses, to EV drivers and advocates, to EVSE installers and manufacturers, to auto dealerships. So just really proud of what we have, and really making sure that we create a space where that tent, the stakeholder network continues to widen. So that's really what we're here to do. So in reflection, let's just kind of take a quick stroll, back 10 years ago when this work was really started. So these plug-in NC maps are an annual project that our teams have worked on over the years. And so it's just really powerful, I think, to take a look at maybe where the state of EV deployment and infrastructure was here in North Carolina 10 years ago. So we'll just give that a quick moment to resonate. And while I'm pulling up these early slides, I just want to, again, using the Microsoft Teams emojis, maybe let's get some thumbs up for any organizations or individuals that were part of the original NCPEV task force. So really want to see, who some of those kind of early supporters were. At this point, it was much more about planning, than it was about education and awareness broadly, right? Thinking about the real starting places for this. And so, I think we'll kind of see the evolution over the years. And I think that speaks to how the engagement has changed for Plug-in NC in a certain way, morphing from the NCPEV task force, where, we were just one of many, many partners. And then into really the birth and the beginning of Plug-in NC as a program to help educate the general audience. So as we move along through 2012, we start to see, as we can imagine, a little bit more vehicle adoption and infrastructure deployment. The vehicle adoption certainly happening in the counties that we might expect to be the early adopters, certainly because of the population centers there. Moving on to 2013, again, we start to see this built out a little bit more. 2014, we see the growth. 2015, 2016, 2017. And I'll note with this that these are both full electric registrations and plug-in hybrid registrations. And the public charging stations are both level 2 and DC fast charging. Moving along through 2018, we start to see much higher levels of deployment in, again, those concentrated regions. 2019. And then 2020. And I think that this is this seems to be a very significant jump, from 2019 to 2020. Certainly there are plenty of EV market factors that we could point to for that. And then 2021, and I think that we're really starting to see, a lot more counties beginning to kind of hit maybe the initial stages of more mass adoption, right? We're seeing a lot more counties have that 100 to 500 vehicle registration shading. And certainly the goal is to have full coverage across the state, right? Not just in the vehicle adoption, but also in the infrastructure that supports them. And so even with the merged settings here of both level 2 and DC fast charging infrastructure, we still really notice a handful of gaps throughout the state. And I know that many of you are working really hard on that, whether it's from the driver side, whether it's again from the site host side, the policy side. So again, just thanks to all of our different stakeholders, that are really working to help build this out. Yeah, and as Chris has mentioned, still not enough fast charging. And so what we need to do to really keep things moving along, and that's what we're here to kind of focus on today. So just to share a little bit more about kind of the breakdown of Plug-in NC, we've really got 3 different pieces or components to the program. We've got our members, which most of you are representing in the membership capacity today. We have our steering committee, which is a committee of about 13 or so companies and organizations that kind of help drive the strategic direction of our program. And then we've got our ambassadors and EV drivers, really, again, helping us keep a real pulse on the ground with what's happening and what that driver experience is. And also all the outreach and education support and the volunteer network that we really get from each of you. So thank you for that. So just touching on each of these a little bit more, here's an overview of our steering committee. Most of these organizations are represented on our call here today. And many of them are going to be presenters today. So really appreciate each of you and the work you do to help make sure that Plug-in NC is going in the right direction. We've got our ambassadors and our volunteer network, right? So this was much more maybe prominent when we were able to really get out and about for outreach events, but we're really excited for National Drive Electric Week this year, all the events that are lining up, and really the opportunity to engage safely in person again. It's going to be a really exciting time, and we've really missed that. And many of you have helped with a lot of the initiatives digitally in any way that you can. So thanks to each of you. And if you would like to join our ambassador network, you'll certainly have an opportunity to do so today or anytime, really. And then lastly, our membership. So first and foremost, I'll say that membership is free of charge. We're not really looking to establish a platform where we make this a strict level of entry or anything like that. Really, what we're trying to do is expand the touch points that Plug-in NC has, really across the entire state. So really just thinking about what we see throughout the entire state when it comes to the deployment of membership. Through all of these different counties. So thinking about, where on this map maybe we don't have any membership presence. Our goal, as Plug-in NC is really to have member representation in every single North Carolina county. And so as you can see, we've certainly got a lot to do in order to make that happen. But there is certainly the opportunity to do that. And just sharing a little bit more about our internal team. I really mentioned, that you have we have the opportunity to kind of present as Plug-in NC here at Advanced Energy as kind of the program managers. And there's so many different organizations and team members that really make this possible. So here are a few of kind of the behind the scenes team members for Advanced Energy that support Plug-in NC. So just want to give a shout out to them, and they're primarily running our communications work. So whether that's on social media for events like this or for in-person events, white papers and resources, they're really the structure that support all of those efforts. So just want to share a little bit of kind of what we're planning to do today. So really for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be focusing on two kind of primary keynote presentations with the messaging really around economic development and the value of that kind of in North Carolina and beyond. And so I think that Stan and Whitney will really be able to share some perspective for that. We're then going to go into a break for about 15 or 20 minutes from this session. And now while that happens, essentially everybody will be moved to their respective breakout groups and sessions that you signed up for. So as you can see, there are 3 different breakout sessions that will be happening concurrently. I'll go ahead and share that these sessions are going to be recorded. So if you wanted to attend all 3, you should have the opportunity to do so in revisiting those recorded sessions. So hopefully that all works out well, where you can access everything that you might like to see today, whether it's live or some other time. And then we're going to come back together and we're going to close up shop, really talk about for the last 30 minutes or so, where that leaves us as a program and as a state kind of working to progress electric transportation initiatives. It'll be a great opportunity to hear from all of you in terms of maybe what we're missing or what we need or what that call to action is, what we can do next. So with that being said, let's just kind of touch on just a few ground rules. As you can see, we've kind of got some different dynamics here with the Microsoft Teams platform. So we want all of our participants to be able to stay on mute in a respectful manner while our panelists and speakers are presenting. There will be time for Q&A in most cases. Please feel free to use some of the Microsoft Teams features that you would have seen before, like raising your hands, applause, thumbs up, sending those questions in the chat. So you should have the opportunity to do that. As I mentioned, this event will be recorded, so no problem if maybe you run into a tech issue during the live session, or if you can't attend all of the breakout sessions that you might want to. And on the point of the breakout sessions, we really want to be respectful of all the different perspectives, kind of all the different angles that we're coming at under the umbrella of supporting electric transportation here in the state. We all have a role to play, so just being respectful of the participants and again of those panelists and speakers. And we're going to have some moderators supporting those breakout sessions as well. So huge thanks to our Clean Cities Coalitions for the help in moderating this event today. And then you're going to want to like during the Q&A session, raise your hand to be able to come off mute, and be able to kind of flag some of those situations if you have any questions or anything like that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Stan. I did see that Stan maybe was having a little bit of problems kind of seeing the slides progress through. So maybe we'll give it a minute. Stan, if you can come off mute and see if everything's working okay for you. And thanks for joining today.
Everything is working fine now, Jacob. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thanks.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. Hello to everybody, and congratulations to Plug-in NC on an awesome 10 years of promoting electric transportation in North Carolina. So I work with the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. I'm the Electric Transportation Policy Director, and I head up our Electrify the South program. We work across the Southeast region promoting electric transportation through advocating for supportive policy, working on utility regulatory reform, and supporting consumer and fleet adoption. So today, I'm going to go ahead and start us off by grounding us in kind of where North Carolina is right now in the EV space. The Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and Atlas Public Policy team up every year to do a report on Southeast transportation electrification. And this graph is from the report that we'll be releasing next week that looks at where we're at here in 2021. And this graph shows, sales in North Carolina, because at the end of the day, what all of our work is about is getting more internal combustion engines displaced by more electric vehicles. And one of the things that excites me about this graph is the trend line. So we see that as the COVID pandemic began wreaking havoc on our economy and on our public health and just our sanity, you saw the dip in 2020 in sales of electric vehicles. And this dip happened with all cars and trucks, not just electric vehicles. But what's really inspiring is how quickly electric vehicle sales have recovered. We're actually having some of the strongest sales quarters in the history of electric vehicles right now. And their electric vehicles are proving much more resilient than gas-powered cars and trucks to the public health and economic crisis that we're enduring. The other thing that I think is really interesting about this graph is you start to see more variety of auto manufacturers beginning to take up market share. Where Tesla still dominates the market, you're seeing increased market share to a variety of companies as those companies ramp up their production and their commitment to electrification. When we look at North Carolina in the context of the Southeast, in this graph, North Carolina is the purple line, and it's exciting to see us chasing and almost catching Georgia. We're sort of right behind Georgia in sales right now, sitting at number 3 in the region. And one of the things that's interesting about this graph is you see, different spikes and drops in the various states, and many of those spikes and drops correspond to different policies or utility investments that have occurred in those states that have either driven sales or slowed down sales in the state. And so, we can unpack that, at a later time in the report that we'll be releasing next week goes into it in detail, but suffice it to say that, both here in the region and nationwide, we see a direct correlation between supportive public policy that really helps get charging infrastructure deployed, helps make the transition to electric fleets and consumer passenger vehicles easier and more attainable, as well as markets where utilities are leaning in more heavily with investment to support the market. You see the public policy and utility reform really coming together to help spur this nascent market and its early growth. Here in North Carolina, we can look at sort of our progress and our state of the market across a variety of indicators. And what Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, what we're sort of tracking are primarily these 6. And when we look at manufacturing employment and manufacturing investment, the Southeast is a really strong location for both. When we look at the region as a whole, thinking about the Carolinas, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, that region represents about 18% of the nation's population, but it has secured almost 40% of all the electric vehicle investments made to date in the country, and is home to about 18% of EV jobs in the country. So within that context, you can see how North Carolina lags the rest of the region, but is showing opportunity and growth in both employment and investment. And these are important considerations because there's a lot of opportunity to grow our economy and grow our job opportunities by securing investments from auto manufacturers and other value chain companies as this electric transportation market grows. But to do that, we need to be a state that's attractive. And part of that is sort of how the market's performing, how utilities are engaging, and what policies are in place to support that market. And so we see with sales, we're ranking 3rd in the region. We've seen steady growth. It's really exciting to see sales in North Carolina up 44% from this time last year. Charging deployment is also up 45%, which is great growth and spurred on by both Duke Energy's electric transportation pilot, work by the municipal utilities and EMCs, and support from the Volkswagen settlement, among other factors. When we look at utility investment, Duke Energy had a pilot. The commission approved a pilot in December for about $24 million, which Duke is executing on now. Duke also has a $53 million second phase pilot proposal before the commission as well. When we track utility investment, we look at what's coming through utility commissions, and we try to pay attention to what's happening in municipal and EMC space as well. And here in North Carolina, both the municipal utilities and the electric member co-ops are doing really good work advancing electrification as well, particularly with the deployment of DC fast chargers through the Volkswagen settlement, as well as some really innovative sort of technology projects like vehicle to grid charging and other things that are happening at the EMCs that are really helping to sort of push our understanding of the technology forward. And I think what's really interesting to watch with the government funding is that, as Volkswagen settlement dollars flow, which is the majority of this funding, there's a lot more remaining. And right now, public comment is open on the phase 2 of the Volkswagen settlement here in North Carolina. And I really encourage folks to look at what DEQ and DAQ are putting forward for a program for phase 2 and go ahead and make comment so we can get that as good as it can be, because those dollars are really helpful in moving the market forward. When we're looking at electrifying transportation and we're kind of looking at the numbers that I was just showing you, North Carolina's got a driver that's unique in the Southeast, in that we have a governor who has set an executive order. Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80, among other things, has set a target of 80,000 EVs registered by 2025. And one of the things that we're looking at is, if we are successful at doing that, we are sort of transitioning our reliance on gas and diesel to using electricity to power transportation. And that has a significant impact from a climate perspective. So just achieving EO 80,000 EV by 2025 goals would save about 500 million pounds of CO2 annually. And then if we look at extrapolating that out and we look at bringing in the Paris Accord and sort of other goals that are being set around reductions and what that means for electric transportation uptake, North Carolina can be in a position to really drive emissions reductions by electrifying this sector. And if North Carolina can align with, and our federal government can align with some of the international goals around reducing CO2 emissions, we can be in a position where we're offsetting upwards of 700 million gallons of gasoline annually, which is pulling 12 billion pounds of CO2 out of the atmosphere every year. So this electrification of transportation has significant climate impacts that are important to be considering as we move forward. The other indicator that I think is really interesting to look at is what happens when we switch from paying for gas and diesel to power transportation to paying for electricity. And because the Southeast doesn't have much oil production or refining capability, we spend a lot of money importing gas and diesel to the region to power transportation, about $94 billion a year. If we were to switch to all electric vehicles today, it would cost us $52 billion as a region to drive the same amount of miles. So driving on electricity just saves a lot of dollars. And the other interesting thing is that because we don't have that production and refining of gas and diesel and are importing those fuels to power transportation, most of those dollars that we spend leave the region, and in North Carolina's case, leave the state. When we switch to electricity, because so much of that generation is happening in state and so much of the jobs that are supporting our electricity sector are occurring in the state, we actually retain a lot more of those dollars. And for North Carolina, the net impact would mean that if all of the cars and trucks and buses were electric today, we'd have an extra $7.7 billion circulating through the state's economy annually. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money in consumer pockets, in local government and state agency pockets to be put to use other than buying gas and diesel. So it's another important consideration when we're thinking about weighing the costs and benefits of electrifying transportation. We understand that there's a lot of investment needed, but there's also significant returns to be gained. And lastly, I want to bring up this map, which is similar to what Jacob was showing with the plug-in NC adoption maps, and just recognize that, currently there is a focus on electric charger deployment and EV ownership in the major metropolitan areas of the state. And we can understand why, we can sort of rationalize that reality, but we shouldn't be comfortable with it. As we look to electrify transportation, we have the opportunity not only to switch to a form of mobility that reduces greenhouse gas emissions and can save the state significant amounts of money and consumers significant amounts of money, but we can also sort of reset how transportation impacts people and what access residents in North Carolina have to clean, reliable transportation. But to do that, we need to be thoughtful, and we need to have policies and regulation that insists on equitable disbursement of charging infrastructure and equitable access to electric mobility. If left to its own devices, the market is going to favor where profitability is most attainable, which is going to be where there's more affluence and more density of population. But to be fair, we've got to make sure that access to electric mobility and the benefits that it provides is accessible to folks who live in rural communities, folks from low to moderate income communities, and folks from communities that have been traditionally underrepresented and overburdened by the cost of transportation. It's a really exciting time right now in the state. There's a lot of opportunity at hand for us to capitalize on this market. And so I just am really excited that Plug-in NC and all of the stakeholders that are part of it and the folks who are here on the webinar today and all the work that's being done is really beginning to take really to gain momentum and kind of get to that point of scale. I think now is the time for us all to just dig in and really seize this moment and get everybody driving in electric vehicles, because at the end of the day, they're just a superior form of transportation. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out at any time, and happy to field any questions if we have time.
Thanks, Dan. And we'll go ahead and hand it over to Whitney now. So Whitney, you should be able to select to take control and hop over from there.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let me see if I can advance this. Yay, I can. So pursuant to Stan's comment about electric vehicles are really the best way to transport ourselves. I am having rural broadband issues this morning, and so I am in my electric vehicle, which has internet and has saved the day. So that is where I'm working from, and I see you guys are getting a super close up of my face, which is always fun. So I am going to talk about electric vehicle charging in rural areas, and we've got a lot going on with economic development and electric vehicle charging. And so I'm going to show you some data and some really exciting data points that we can pluck off of EV charging stations that make an excellent case for economic development, particularly in small towns and more rural areas outside of larger cities and more obvious, heavily populated areas. So this is just a quick look at population centers in North Carolina. I don't think this heat map will be a surprise to anyone. We have the triangle, the triad, we've got the Charlotte area, and then of course down toward the coast in Wilmington. Those are like every place, very obvious places for business. They've got the people. They tend to have a little bit more of the money and infrastructure, but this is not where everybody goes on a daily basis. And while the obvious opportunity for growth there is so much more opportunity in the rest of the state as well. So here are the traffic patterns. I'm sure this is familiar to y'all as well. You know, kind of where these heat up. That is, again, sort of, they're the obvious routes. And when we look at placement of DC fast charging and other types of stations, we do look at these traffic routes, and these are where the corridors are. But it's not the whole story. It's just part of the story. So I'm going to take a look at 3 North Carolina communities here, and I'm actually not sure if any of these folks are on the call today or not. I want to look at Marion, North Carolina, Oriental, North Carolina, and Hamlet, North Carolina. And all of these communities put in 2 ports a few years ago. These have been going for a while, so we've got some data on them. And I just want to take a look at how these communities are impacted. You can see they're all fewer than 10,000 people, Oriental fewer than 1,000, although that blows up during the summer, during boating season. So let's take a look at what their stations have done and link that to an economic development case. So first, let's talk about rural communities as opposed to urban communities as far as infrastructure and what that means. Again, I think these are kind of obvious. Urban and suburban communities began EV adoption earlier. It accelerates faster. There's a much higher density of multifamily housing, which actually for EV charging is a bit of a problem. High traffic counts on highways. So they've got kind of this pool of ready-made constituency to use these EV charging stations. They've got this pool of demand, and utilization is going to be predictably high. In more rural areas, what I hear when I talk to folks is also predictable, and that is we don't know if we have the drivers. We don't know if this is going to work. We've got low traffic counts. No one comes here. People charge at home. Why would they come charge in our town? But this is where economic development is really palpably assisted by EV charging. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So Marion, North Carolina, they've got 2 ports downtown. This was put in, I believe, with a Duke Energy grant a few years ago. That would have been 2017, 2018. So what you're looking at right here is you're looking at these dots, and I've got one blown up of the same thing. These pins are driver zip codes. So these pins represent where drivers live that used these stations. So what do we notice here? We notice that, of course, there's a preponderance of drivers right in that location, but look at where they're coming from. They're coming from Mooresville, Chapel Hill, some as far away as Dallas. We've got up in Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C. We've got these much farther away points. So what does that mean? What can we extrapolate from that? Well, it means that EV drivers are coming to this station for whatever reason, vacation, visiting family, whatever it is, and they are coming and they are using that station. So what can we take from that? Well, they're also bringing their wallets, right? They're bringing their pocketbooks. EV drivers are right now part of a demographic that is typically upwardly mobile. They have money to spend. They typically have 2 kids. This is changing really rapidly as EVs become they become more affordable. They become part of the used car network. But these are folks that are value added economic development resources. What you want in economic development, of course, is dollars coming from in town, but you really want those dollars coming from out of town, because there's not a cap on those dollars that come in to businesses in town. So let's look at how long people are staying. Let me see if I can advance. There we go. So we can also pull off of the network, off of ChargePoint stations. We can pull session length. And the average session length in Marion, North Carolina is 1 hour and 57 minutes. And you can kind of see this distribution here. So the bulk of it is over there to the very left. And then we've got some folks who stay for probably too long, but for a while. But the average is 1 hour and 57 minutes. So what is one to do with 1 hour and 57 minutes of time? Well, you can go to Mr. Bob's Donuts. You can go to Krabby Abby's. You can go get something at the Chop House, walk around town, whatever it is. Now, that's the first piece. We get them there. We know they're staying there. We know how long they're staying there. Now we have to connect them to where are they spending their money and what are they spending it on. That's the next step, and that is something that is also supported by EV charging. There's lots of ways to do that. I won't go into it now, but this is all trackable. So let's see who's next. I've got Oriental, North Carolina. They actually have 2 stations in Oriental. They've got one at the marina and they've got one at the town hall. These are single port stations, so they have 2 ports. And look at the distribution here. We've got some folks coming from far away, and I always kind of look at those with a cautious eye. They could be people who are driving here. They could be people who moved here. It's a little bit difficult to tell, although we could find out. We could connect to those drivers and communicate with them with their permission and find out. So you've got locals, but you've also got folks coming in from Charlotte and Raleigh and Chapel Hill, Durham, the Triangle, the Triad. They're also coming in and they are parking their EV and they are spending money out there. Let's see how long they're parking for. In Oriental, they're parking for about 2 hours and 1 minute. So pretty consistent. And they're parking there. And what is there to do? Well, lots of stuff. You've got the marina. You have many, many things within walking distance that folks can go and they can hang out while they charge their vehicle. And while they're hanging out, they tend to spend money. Target did a study a while ago, several years now, and Target figured that for every minute people are in the store, they spend an extra dollar, up to about 78 minutes. So I don't know how that translates with small towns, but I bet somebody does. Hamlet, North Carolina. Hamlet, North Carolina was one of those where I went and I sat in the city council meeting, and they were enthusiastic but really cautious. They didn't really think anybody was going to use their stations. They do have a really neat train stop there, but Hamlet is kind of on the way to somewhere else. It is a cute little town and really a pleasure to walk around. Look at this distribution. It is the best state distribution of either all of these 3. We've got people coming to Hamlet from all over the state, and we sometimes all over the country. We've got Washington, Asheville, Atlanta, and then you zoom in and you see that people are coming from all over the state and they're using this EV charging station. Now, would they have come to Hamlet if the EV charging station wasn't there? I don't know, but they wouldn't have driven their EV. I can be fairly certain of that. So here's another example of how EV charging can bring in dollars and bring in people, and their distribution is a little bit less. It's an hour and a half, but an hour and a half is plenty of time to walk around, get some breakfast, get some lunch, spend some money at local shops in Hamlet. So I think we all know there's a huge projected increase in battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. That is absolutely a conclusion that I think we're all really confident in. And I think these numbers are probably low. With what we're seeing happen with adoption and with the infrastructure bill and all of that, I think these are going to be much higher. So it's a really exciting time for smaller communities, rural communities, to really get involved, because this is key. Just like all of the other infrastructure projects that go on, this is key for resiliency, and it is key in holding this infrastructure glue together between the big cities. So small towns and smaller communities are one of my absolutely favorite groups to work with, because there's such a huge impact that can be made on your communities. And that impact is absolutely trackable. We have the data, we can see what it's doing, and we can augment whatever is happening with partnerships with your local businesses and local groups to make this work even better for your town. So I will end that there, and I think we're going to go to questions or something like that, and happy to answer them. Jacob, you want me to stop presenting now? No, I'm not going to stop presenting. Somebody's going to take control.
That's it. Yes. So let me go ahead and take control here. Whitney, thanks so much. And Stan, thanks as well. I think it's a really great narrative to hear kind of two pieces of the same coin, right? With economic development opportunities here in North Carolina, kind of Stan coming at it from the manufacturing perspective and also kind of the regional market share, and where that leads us to reinvest dollars in North Carolina, and Whitney really sharing those examples. And the role that charging stations kind of play in facilitating that. So yeah, we've got about probably 10 minutes or so for some questions. So, let's go ahead. If anybody would like to send in questions via the chat, that's going to be the best way to do it kind of in this main session. And we'll start to kind of throw some questions over to Whitney and Stan. So I'll go ahead and get us started, because I haven't seen too many questions come through yet. So we'll see kind of what we get there. So, I guess I'd like to ask to both Whitney and Stan, what's the benefit of electric transportation that maybe we don't stress or talk about enough in North Carolina? I think that we talk a lot about the emissions reductions and fuel savings and things like that, which are obviously very important. But is there anything in that story that maybe we're missing, or that we should emphasize to potential drivers and communities more?
I mean, I'll take a stab at that first. I think that one benefit that we discussed, but it's difficult to sort of get your head around and quantify, is the public health impact of transitioning to electric transportation and the reduction of tailpipe emissions that are associated with EVs. And that's particularly impactful when we start looking in the medium and heavy duty EV space and look at how goods and services move across the state and where distribution centers are located across the state. And when we overlay that movement of goods and services, as well as people and distribution centers, with public health disparities, we find that where transportation is most densely concentrated, people suffer from the most acute health impacts from those emissions. So there's a huge benefit to North Carolina that's not only sort of economic and public health, but it's also breaks on racial and economic lines as well. And so a lot of the communities that are burdened disproportionately by the impacts of transportation are Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and low to moderate income communities. So I think elevating the value of electrification from a public health standpoint is really important. And I also second the noise, which I saw come through the chat, because transportation noise is something that any of us who live near major corridors deal with, and a quieter North Carolina would be a more beautiful North Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Stan. And Whitney, any thoughts there?
Yeah, definitely. Everything Stan said, and then I cannot reiterate enough, EV charging is the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. And they will come to your town after not thinking about coming to your town for many years. They will find things to do. They will discover everything great that you have to offer. And the communities that put these in are really elevated in the eyes of tourism and opportunity. And there will be an economic benefit. You will see impact, and we can help track that impact. But one of the things that I hear So often it's two things. It's we're not big enough to consider this, and we don't really think it's going to help anything. That is wrong. That is wrong. And I have 40 million charging sessions that say that it's wrong. So dive in with if you dive in with the attitude that folks will come use this and this will be a benefit, I promise it will be a benefit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Whitney. And I think on that note, I just saw a question come through from Beth Davis. Beth, thanks for asking that question about basically what kind of challenges come up, when trying to work, install charging stations, deploy charging stations in rural communities. And so I would ask kind of that question to each of you, knowing and acknowledging, that not every rural community is the same, right? And Stan, I think that you have a perspective, especially kind of representing Western North Carolina, and how that might be different than some of the examples that Whitney shared, in Eastern North Carolina. And so, what are some examples of those challenges? What are some mitigation strategies? And then also, what is the variation like, from maybe one county or one community to another?
Well, just thinking from that, Western North Carolina lens, but also, as Whitney's been pointing to, kind of thinking about the opportunity across rural communities. I think that, one of the challenges is the value proposition of electrifying transportation is not clearly understood in rural communities, and in part that's because the vehicle types that dominate the rural community markets have not been available in electrified models. Most rural communities aren't going to benefit from transit bus electrification, as they use sort of cutaway buses for most of their public transportation, and sort of school bus electrification is still, slow coming. And so when we think about the exposure to electric vehicles that have occurred in rural communities, it's significantly lower than has occurred in those metropolitan areas where you're starting to see them on the roads often, and a lot of people will know somebody in their neighborhood or community who has an EV. And so that kind of trickles up in rural communities, and decision makers might not really understand the kind of economic development that Whitney is referring to, or understand kind of the benefit to their constituents, the customers, with electrification. And so I think there's a big kind of education outreach element that needs to be addressed in its, to your point about all rural communities being different. In North Carolina, a lot of our rural communities are also where our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities reside as well. And so there's a range of diversity. And when we think about articulating the value proposition and doing education and outreach, I think we all need to do a much better job understanding what messages resonate, understanding who the right messengers are to carry those messages, and really engage rural communities in the conversations about policies, programs, and benefits, so that they're driving the conversation forward, rather than those of us who may think we know what they need driving the conversation. So, I think a lot of the work resides there for kind of unlocking and opening the rural market opportunity across the state.
Thanks. Yeah, and Whitney, any comments, just in terms of,
Yeah.
and it sounds like you addressed it a little bit, in terms of kind of the skepticism maybe that it would work in a certain community, but anything else?
Yeah, I can address just some nuts and bolts stuff too that kind of is on people's minds. And one of the places that's not very glamorous, but that we can run into some hurdles, is when communities want to put stations in and they run into the very simple issue of they don't own the lot where they want the station to go in. So that is an opportunity for collaboration between things like downtown groups, shop owners, building owners, to collaborate and put all of this infrastructure in. Maybe it's not community owned, maybe it is community facilitated, and they get the groups together and figure out sort of, whose dirt is this even going to go on? We hear concerns about energy costs and things like that. All of those things are solvable in a way that is really exciting for communities to move forward. And if I could leave kind of one piece of advice, and that is make a community transportation plan and an infrastructure plan. Probably there's a 30-year plan in place already. It very likely doesn't have electrification in it, but make this plan up as though you have all of the money in the world. Shelve it if you need to, and as funding comes up, you'll be able to pull pieces of that plan down and put them into place without a whole lot of discussion. And to Stan's point, that allows plenty of time and discussion around what is going to fit your community best with regard to goals, demographic makeup, funding availability, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see two other questions that have come through, and maybe we'll grab just one of them, because I want to give enough time for us to really kind of work through the breakout room designations while everyone goes on a break. So when thinking about, and this question is from Joe Baum, like when thinking about kind of the economic trade-offs with charging stations, Stan, you really mentioned kind of the point of the VW settlement dollars that are really kind of flowing through the state, which is extremely impactful and important, but where does that leave us as those dollars are no longer available? Is there opportunity from both, kind of Stan, your policy view, and Whitney from kind of your on the ground perspective? And I know we've got a lot of utility representation here today as well. So, just curious kind of like where we think about as we move past the maybe the statewide funding dollars that are currently available through the mitigation trust, and where that leaves us over the next 5 to 10 years.
I think it's a great question, and if we track the dollars that have helped support EV infrastructure deployment across North Carolina and across the country, inevitably those dollars touch back to federal, state, or utility investment one way or another, right? So that investment that's been made to date to support EV infrastructure has been critical in getting charging stations deployed, giving site hosts the capital they need to purchase equipment from great companies like ChargePoint, and kind of really allowing things to stand up. That is going to need to continue, in the near term for us to get to a place where we have not only enough saturation of EV charging to support a robust market, but also enough sort of diversity of locations like we've been talking about. And when we look at those sort of two challenges, one being enough density of charging and the other, enough sort of geographic coverage of charging, state agencies, local governments, utilities, federal government all still play a role in making sure that happens. Because if they do it and they do it successfully, then we have more electric vehicles on the road. As electric vehicles are traveling more miles, they're doing more charging. The companies that are providing infrastructure services are able to make more money and really start to develop sort of this market forward approach to continuing to put charging stations out there. We know that there's likely going to be dollars flowing from the federal government to support charging. There's some more money left in the VW settlement. There's a lot of interest in municipal EMC and investor-owned utilities investing more. I think what's really critical, though, is that we make sure that the investments that are being made, we know enough now to make sure that those investments being made are strategic, right? Utilities have a role to play. VW settlement dollars have a role to play. The federal government dollars have a role to play. And if we do it strategically, we can sort of align all of these funding streams to address the sort of issues of EV charger deployment and really help accelerate EV adoption across the state. So I think it's just really important that we're not just taking dollars in and putting infrastructure on the ground, but to Whitney's point, we have a plan and we're executing that plan on both the state and local level so that deployment of infrastructure winds up truly benefiting the market and the growth of electrification.
Yeah, great. And Whitney, just so we can address all the questions here in the chat, why don't you take us home with you're sharing your thoughts on pull-through charging stations, you know, not only for maybe medium-duty EVs, as Dave Willis mentioned, but also for, you know, towing trailers or equipment. Yeah, what are your thoughts on kind of pull-through stations?
So you're talking about, I can't see the chat, but you're talking about the actual parking space configuration where somebody who is that's been a big topic lately. Yeah, pull through is a configuration that we have started adding to a lot of our installations, just depending on where they are. It's not going to work everywhere, but particularly with all of the trucks coming, and I mean, heck, a Tesla can tow tons of stuff. You know, pull through charging is going to be something that's absolutely necessary, you know, just like you have at any kind of truck stop or a Cracker Barrel or anything like that. So that thoughtfulness in configuration is something that that we absolutely want to see coming up. And as we just, as a by the way, as we start seeing more like Express Plus and more of these really integrated kind of, I call them transit charging stations at locations for travelers who are doing things like towing. This is going to be something that we see more and more of configuration wise. And so I think that's good news. It requires just a little more thought. It requires a little bit of a change from the utility, but that means the trucks are coming, and that's fun.
Yeah, definitely. Thinking about the F-150 and Rivian and you know, hopefully many more soon to come. So, well, Whitney and Stan, thanks so much for setting the stage, I think, for the rest of the conversation that'll be happening this morning. Really appreciate you know, each of you joining today, but also the involvement and the, you know, really the contributions that you've made to Plug and NC over so much time and so many years.